The question is, why are we guys and gals always looking for water-based life? Couldn't life have other kinds of bases out there in the universe? Why are we so narrow-minded as to assume that life chemically needs the same things that we need? It's a great question, and I think you're right to ask it. And I think that we as a community need to keep it in mind. And in fact, it does come up a lot at meetings. And so there's a couple of answers to your question. One is that a lot of smart people have thought about this, and in fact, there are people who study this and work on it, and nobody yet has come up with another chemical basis for life that works as well as carbon molecules in water. Now, that may well be because we are not as smart as nature, and nature has a way of cooking things up that we can't imagine, and then we discover them through exploration. So we have to keep our eyes wide open. But I think it's safe to say, it may not be definitively true, but it's a reasonable thing to say that life needs a liquid medium. That is, chemical life. Liquid, you know, it's hard to imagine it in a solid because solids, crystals, nothing moves around. It's hard to imagine it in a gas because everything's just flying around all over the place. A liquid is a good place for chemicals to get together and do this sort of organized dance that life is. Now, what liquids are there in the universe? There are others. There's methane on Titan. There are places where there's probably, well, we know there's ammonia, water mixtures. There's liquid lava. So could you, well, but I mean, people have tried to think about life in these different situations, and it may be that we just haven't come up with it yet. But there's another answer to the question which is more pragmatic. You have to start the search somewhere. And we know enough about water-based life. Even that we don't know that much about how it may manifest. But at least we have some ideas about how to start the search. Now, the thing we have to be careful is you don't want to just be looking for your keys under the streetlight, because that's where they're easy to find. And so, but a lot of people have thought about, well, how do you find a biosignature, a signature of life somewhere? What do you look for that isn't assuming that life works just like us? And what a lot of people have come up with is what we call chemical perturbations to an environment, or non-equilibrium atmospheres. That is, look for an atmosphere that is radically altered, as Earth's atmosphere is, from the state it would be in without something really weird affecting it. I mean, Earth would not have all this oxygen and other things like methane in the atmosphere without life. So one thing we want to do is just look for weird atmospheres that could be perturbed by any kind of life. And then if you find a weird atmosphere, that doesn't prove you found life, but it makes you go, aha, let's study this planet more carefully. So it's a good question. We're working on it. We have this provisional sense that water-based life, at least, is a good kind to find. And water is a very common substance, does form liquid on some planets. But we do have to keep your question in mind. And somewhere in the universe, I'm willing to bet there is water-based life. But somewhere in the universe, I'm willing to bet there's probably non-water-based life. And so ultimately, we have to just keep our eyes open.
Yes, over here.
You touched on it a little bit, but I'm curious why you elevate human intelligence, our awareness of what's going on, and any actions that we may or may not take beyond normal biological and evolutionary forces. What makes our intelligence so much more interesting to focus on it as something other than just a natural process?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. I mean, and it's not...
David, repeat the question.
Yeah, so the question is, why am I focusing so much on human intelligence as some really interesting and new process, as opposed to just looking at all the different kinds of natural biological changes on Earth? And that, I tried to get at that a little bit, but maybe I didn't to your satisfaction. But certainly, I mean, the whole point of looking at the Anthropocene is that something new is happening on Earth. And it's not something subtle, it's really dramatic. Earth is in the grip of some forces, some kind of change, however you want to describe it, that something that wasn't happening certainly 100,000 years ago, maybe not 10,000 years ago. So that's very sudden. Suddenly, in a geological timescale, Earth is going through this dramatic change. So even somebody, if I were not a human, it's hard to get into that mindset, but I was just looking at this planet and saying, oh, well, here's this one era of change, the asteroids were hitting, and here's this other era of change, oxygen went up in the atmosphere, and here's this other era of change that's happening now. What is responsible for that? How can I characterize that? It's something new and different. So even on that level, I think it merits a new classification. It's not necessarily a value judgment. I mean, it's hard to avoid that part of the discussion too. You could say this is horrible, you could say this is wonderful, but it's different, it's new, and it's worth trying to get at what that difference is.
Over there.